Alex, welcome to that Optimism Man podcast.
I'm delighted to be here, Victor. So good to see you.
Well, Alex, you know I'm a huge fan of your writing and your social media and the like, and yet no one visits the Centre for Optimism and that Optimism podcast without being asked that question. What makes you optimistic? And you've said to me in the past, optimism is the only way to go. That we're up against the hard times. If we're not optimistic, we're likely to give up. So, what gives you that conviction? Is it your life experience, your faith, or your belief in the goodness of people?
Oh, I'd say certainly I have a lot of trust in human beings. I love the variety of human beings I run into, whether they're strangers or old friends. Um, but I maintain just what you've said that I mentioned previously, that I cannot imagine any other way to proceed in life. A pessimist, it's almost like, you're either in a dark tunnel or you're in a dark tunnel that has a light at the end of the tunnel. And I even saw once a quote by, which I'm sure you know all the quotes about optimism, but evidently Winston Churchill said, I am an optimist. It doesn't seem much use being anything else. And that's sort of how I think. If we're up against a difficult time, do we look for a solution or do we fall in a heap and say, well, what can we do? Nothing we can do.
Yeah, those great people in history, Mandela, very similar
Hmm.
to Churchill. You know, he in his book he said, "Yeah, I'm an optimist. I don't know whether it's nature or nurture. I just know it's keeping one foot in front of the
Yeah.
other,
And
and
looking up, and he
and
said, looking up at the sun.
looking
Yeah.
up at the sun." Now, you know, you've written on this and you've helped people. How do you maintain your optimism? And what practices help you keep it alive? I know you do morning and evening gratitude, you do sea swims with an iceberg group, you go walking in the bush. So what are the rituals and moments, of joy that help you maintain that optimism in a world that's sometimes biased against it?
Victor, I follow the advice in the chapter in my book that you gave me as the master of optimism. There's so many tips, and I hope I adopt quite a lot of those. Nature always gives me a sense of optimism. Now, here we are in the springtime and watching them, it's miraculous to see how, for instance, a rose bush grows, the leaves and then the buds, and then these exquisite flowers with all their petals. How they do that, it's just a everyday amazement. The sunrise, the sunset. So there's so much in nature that keeps me optimistic. And also I make choices like the books I read, the films I see, what I listen to on the radio, social media.
Mm.
I choose an algorithm that directs happy stories, resilient stories, stories that make me laugh. So people can say that social media is a waste of time, but in a way, it's not for me because it always makes me feel optimistic and cheerful and positive.
Yeah, you are so right. My algorithm on Facebook and LinkedIn and even Twitter, tends to the positive and positive people. And if you share positive stories, you get that back. And I do love that notion of yours. I mean, the nature and spring. I love growing roses. My garden has been full of daffodils and jonquils this year. I've got the Peruvian lilies. I've got the Asiatic lilies about to bloom. And just each time I pass those flowers, I just stop and look at them. Or as Joe Nye, the head of the Harvard School, said to me, he said, never stop smelling the roses. And when my roses are out, I make sure I follow that rule to smell the roses. So,
And of course, Victor, you don't have to have a beautiful garden. You can live in a flat and walk to a park or walk by other people's gardens and see what is coming out of their fence, or as long as you're not in too much of a rush.
Yeah.
The beauty is everywhere.
And in people too. I love saying hello to everyone I pass,
Yes.
and if they pause, I say, "And what's been the best thing in your day?" And a conversation arises. And I know you find joy in talking to strangers, that serendipity of connection. Do you want to tell us some of those stories and how that enlivens your life?
Oh, well, I often hear people talk about the loneliness in our society, and loneliness is counteracted immediately if you talk to strangers. Now, occasionally they don't answer, but that I find that's very rare. Mostly, even if they're surprised. And a man said recently to me, "Oh, do I know you?" And I said, "No, we don't know each other. I'm just saying good morning." And then he happily smiled and said good morning back. Um, but and people's dogs, I stop and talk to their dogs, and they're always delighted to tell me all the history of their dog and its quirky personality, and or children, talking about someone's children. I haven't yet, I haven't yet said what is the best thing that's happening in your day the way you do to a stranger. Um, I haven't done that yet, but I might well do that sometime.
Listeners, that is one of my tricks. So I love, instead of asking people, "How are you?" and most
Mm.
Australians answer with, "Not bad," or "Not too
Yes, that's
bad."
right.
Just give it a go. Just try today and tomorrow, listeners. Instead of "How are you?" just try, "What's been the best thing in your day?" And they will look at you
Yes.
surprised the first time. But after that, they start throwing it back at you, and it becomes part of your pattern of life.
Yes. And there's always something. There's always something that is great in the day.
Oh, look, even in Canberra last week, a senior official, he said, he paused and he thought, and he said, "To be frank, it was that first cup of coffee this morning." And
Yes.
of course, it starts a conversation about coffee. Now, you've had such an interesting life. You've been a writer, you're a speaker, you're an author. Do you want to share some of that life story with our listeners?
I had an interesting life. So we've all had interesting life stories. That's one of the things about engaging with people, is that everybody has an interesting life story. And mine meant I was an only child, and that has implications. I didn't have any siblings to play with or to fight with. And my father was a naval officer, so we moved every 2 years. That meant a new school every 2 years. Now I notice at schools, if there's a new child in a school, they make a big fuss. They introduce them to other children well, there was nothing like that in my day. So I think it was a very formative uh, development, because I had to learn to go up to strangers, all the new kids in every new class, and they weren't particularly interested in me, so I had to adapt to what they were interested in and sort of find my way into new friendships. It was a very useful thing to learn.
That notion of empathy, these days it's a science, and I even teach empathy mapping when I'm teaching great policy. But it sounds like there was a naturalness to it. And then obviously post school, I mean, you embraced that curiosity, didn't you? You made it a profession.
Well, yes, indeed. And then I came to Australia when in 1971, and everyone seemed very closely knit here. So once again, I used the experience I'd had as a child to join in a new place, new people, until I was embraced by them.
Ah.
Yeah.
So what, your work these days, and you speak at many organizations about energy for life. So what has inspired you to help people find their energy for life?
That book, as you know, is all about health and well-being, Victor. Um, as I'm getting older, I'm finding that there are people who make a priority of looking after their health, and maybe the great majority have many other priorities, which I understand, and don't take that time. And I went seeking for people who help me to look after my health. Now, one person said to me in one of the speaking engagements, isn't it a bit sort of selfish or self-involved to be thinking about your own health and well-being? I thought about that, and it just confirmed my belief that if we are not healthy, if we are not, if we don't sleep well, if we don't wake up with a degree of energy, then we are unable to be more optimistic. We're unable to be looking after our families in the way we want to. We're unable to be as productive at work as we would like to. So it's a foundation for me of everything. And because I met people who were so helpful to me, I simply wanted to pass over their wisdom and advice to as many people who were inclined to listen or read.
Yeah, that is so powerful, to generate that. And what I loved about your collaboration was you brought so many experts together to share that wisdom for the energy of life. I think one of the lovely stories in that book, and a story you tell, is the remarkable story of your parents. Their longevity, not just longevity in life, but in love. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Well, they were the oldest couple in Australia. They lived a very long life, and quite often, because I'm now getting, I'm getting into the long life category myself. People say, "Oh, it's your genes." Well, I looked at my parents, and no one in their family trees had that degree of longevity. So then I began to think more about how they led their lives. What actually did they prioritize? How did they think? And what I learned is they had ongoing curiosity. They never thought about aging. They always thought about what they could do in the day. They were very gregarious. Um, when they couldn't do something, because obviously as we age, if you're 40, you're not 21. If you're 60, you're not 40 anymore. So they were able to make regular adjustments in their life to keep enjoying their days. So I think lifestyle is terribly important in terms of um, our 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 choices of how we live our lives. Probably uh, very important in terms of whether we capitalize on our genes or counteract some of the genes that we wish we didn't inherit.
Yeah, I was in San Francisco last week and I caught up with John Hagel. And John, his latest book is called The Journey Beyond Fear. And two of the pillars are curiosity and optimism. He's also now, as he's got older, taken a much greater interest in longevity and the technology around longevity in Silicon Valley. It still comes back to what your parents exhibited and what you exhibit. That curiosity for life, that looking for the joy, for being gregarious, for having company. So that ancient wisdom, I think, is now finding an even deeper root in science.
Well, I'm noticing people much, much younger than me beginning to talk about aging and what they can't do. And um, it's the voice in our head is very powerful. So throughout the book, it was interesting how many of these of my gurus, including you, talked about the voice in our head.
Yeah.
Uh, we can analyze where it came from. It probably came from a long time ago when before we remember. And even being a little kid, even you had the most loving parents, we were all very small in a world of huge adults. So of course we were intimidated at times, and maybe we got a message at school of, you were silly to have done this, or that was a stupid thing to do, and we internalize that, and that's in our head. But we don't need to listen to those voices. We can change the voices in our head. They're not giving us truth all the time, and they could be very outdated.
And I think at that point, I mean, I'm thinking of your book, and you deliberately challenged the traditional view of health and aging, and you reframed it as a path to greater joy, fun, and connection. So has that idea deepened or evolved with you since you wrote the book?
Oh, it absolutely has, because I'm noticing, I'm noticing increasingly people of my age. See, I'm 81 now, Victor. And so, well, some dear 81-year-olds are no longer even on the planet. Others are suffering, and my heart goes out to them. I do wonder if some of our choices can keep us, I know I don't wonder, I believe that some of our choices can keep us strong, healthy, flexible, and looking at a more optimistic way of living a life, and therefore making a real difference. Longevity is nothing I think we want to yearn for if, in fact, we're not enjoying our days. So, good health to me is certainly waking up with a degree of energy, having goals and purpose, and enjoying other people, enjoying nature. It's something to aim for.
Yeah, I think early in my research on optimism, that knowledge around longevity has become so profound. I think there was a study in Italy of 100-year-olds who were still active in local life, and in their case, it was exactly the word you used, purpose. And there's an Israeli study that shows an incredible difference in lifespan at 85-year-olds. If you're optimistic and life is worth living, you keep living. If you're pessimistic and life isn't worth living, you won't. And so I think that that notion of optimism as the trait most closely associated with healthy longevity is so strong. And Rob Masters, who you know, and I have been distilling our research, now 10 years of research, into one simple phrase. The answer to life's most pressing questions is optimism. And I think we started with that discussion today. Choose optimism. The Dalai Lama says, choose optimism. It feels better. So, what do you reckon about that as a guiding principle? The answer to life's most pressing questions is optimism.
I'll tell you what it makes me think of. I am mourning at the moment the death of Jane Goodall, who is one of my oh, gurus, one of the people I've looked up to for so many years. And of course, she wrote a book about hope. Now, I went looking for the definition of hope versus optimism, and there's all sorts of definitions, and I really don't care. I think what she said about hope is the way I think about optimism, that if we don't have hope, if we're not optimistic, we're likely to end up apathetic, because we think, what can we do about all the problems in the world? There's nothing we can do. I do not ever want to think that way, because I firmly believe there is always something in our control. There is always something we can influence about any situation. Sometimes it may be a choice to say, look, there's nothing specifically I can do to change this, but I can adapt to it. Um, I can disregard it and focus on something else. So, yes, I've been thinking a lot about Jane Goodall and everything that, speaking of purpose in her life, age 91, still at a speaking engagement in California when she died, which is all she wanted to do, is to speak about her passion.
Yeah, yeah, and she used optimism and hope interchangeably. I still remember interviewing Martin Seligman, the guru of
Yes.
positive psychology, and he'd just written his book on hope. And my fundamental research question is, what makes you optimistic? And Martin said, "Oh, you could add the word hope." And I said, "Well, Martin, that's your book. I'm going to stick to optimism." But I think, yeah, people like Seligman and Jane Goodall and others use those words interchangeably, and I.
Yes. And
I
I
think
do.
there's a bit of a sort of there's in a couple of religions there's this sort of comparison between the virtues of hope and optimism. And I always say it doesn't matter. The
Mm.
optimistic tend to be more hopeful, and the hopeful tend to be more optimistic.
Optimistic, yes. Yeah, well, that's how I see it. And speaking of Martin Seligman, the psychology chapter, there's 17 professionals I interviewed, as you know, all of whom give us different, terrific advice about looking after ourselves. And the psychologist, Sabina Reed, speaks about Martin Seligman, who she's followed over many years. And one of the things he talks about is an act of kindness and how powerful that can be, not only for the recipient, but also for the giver of an act of kindness. There's so many little acts of kindness we can make. every day. And what a difference that makes to receive and to give.
Yeah, and it sometimes can be so simple. You're sitting on the bus, and this loneliness epidemic people talk to is partly choice. And so if you talk to the person opposite you in the bus, so often, they look uplifted by the fact that someone took an interest. And it doesn't matter whether it's an Asian student who doesn't know many people here or, an older person, just someone taking an interest just sparks a smile and a story. And so yeah, I think you've nailed something there, Alex. I think top notch. Now for those listening, again, you've got a lifetime of experience, you've written a book, you do speaking engagements. What are three tips that you would give people to try this week to be more infectiously optimistic?
Three tips. All right. Well, go for a walk, get away from the office or wherever you are. Even a very productive office will be more productive if people take breaks. The chapter about eyes, looking after your eyes, means that screen time, if your eyes are absolutely focused on a screen for too many hours, your eyesight is going to suffer. So take a break, go for a walk outside, speak to someone, offer someone a little kindness, such as we were just speaking about. Look at a tree, a patch of grass somewhere, the sky. Take deep, deep, slow breaths, pause, and and then go back to whatever you're doing. You'll be so much more optimistic about solving the problems that seemed possibly insurmountable that day. Find someone you can laugh with, or just pick one of those little social media posts that make you laugh and smile. Because once you've laughed and smiled, you're also going to be more likely to enjoy the day.
Yeah, I think both Sabina and Maria Roberto has talked about that as well, that getting outside and looking at the horizon, looking out at the sky. It's so
Yes.
good, both for your mentality and for your health. Now, thinking about those audiences you speak to, and sometimes they can be a bit skeptical.
Yes.
No. Particularly older audiences, they've got more time to think, so they ask you the toughest questions. And I've spoken to a lot of probus groups and the like. So when you talk about energy for life, what have you noticed about the questions or emotions that you elicit in those audiences?
Well, some people do believe. Um, I was speaking to a progress group recently, and everyone was very enthusiastic. And then a man raised his hand. He was a quite a mature, retired doctor, and he said, "Well, this is all very interesting, but genes determine everything." And I didn't want to be impolite with him, but I said, well, yes, I do respect that as an idea. But I said, once we have the belief that our genes determine everything, we've got nowhere to move. And yes, our genes do have an impact on our who we are and how our life transpires. Our choices about our lifestyle are going to make a huge impact on that. So I hope that was acceptable to him. Probably not, but I think others heard the message. The other thing I hear a lot that I hadn't realized was how difficult it is for some people to change habits. Now, once again, let me go back to the Victor Perton chapter in the book that talks about optimism. I think if you're a pessimist, you may say, "Ugh, there's no point in trying to do anything different. I'm just the way I am." The optimist will say, well, maybe I could try something that I haven't done before, something that's manageable, something that's sustainable, some small change that's just going to lift my spirits, make me healthier, and will lead me to the next change.
Yeah, that's great wisdom. So, Alex, I commend people if they want a great speaker who's sparkling, on this energy for life, they should book you, but they should also buy your book as well. So, what's the best way people can stay in touch with you and your work, Alex, and buy your book, Energy for Life?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Victor. You know, one of the things I always say is it's not my book. It's the advice of all these amazing people that gave me their time and their tips. People such as you. Now, your chapter, for instance, has so much research in it that documents what a difference that optimism makes. Um, I learned so much about how what we eat can make an extraordinary difference. I tell people sometimes when I'm speaking that I do have a secret drug, and then I pause and they're all looking very, very expectantly. Ooh, I wonder what pill she takes. And then I talk about sleep with all the advice of the CEO of the Sleep Health Foundation, who gave me all the tips about sleep. I don't know about you, Victor, but if I haven't had a good night's sleep, I just don't operate in the same way as I like to face the day. So yes, there's some. I'm glad you mentioned that. Look, if anyone in Australia wants a copy in print, if they go to alixbradfield.com, I will send them a book. Alex, by the way, has an I, Alix Bradfield.com. I'm on
And also,
Insta.
you're on Instagram as well,
Yeah,
I think.
same name. Yes. Um, And yes, what else can I say? Oh yes, well of course on Amazon the Kindle book is available.
Well, it's great reading, and as Alex very modestly says, it synthesizes a whole lot of experts, but could only have been done by Alex. So she's being excessively modest. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us today, and I follow what you write and I follow what you publish, and I can commend that to everyone. So, on behalf of all of our listeners, Alex Bradfield, thank you very much today, and best wishes with your mission to bring
Thank you,
energy to
Victor.
life
It's
for
always a
people.
pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much.